He thought it was just another old man, too slow, too weak, beneath him. But when he sees the truth, everything changes. This janitor isn't ordinary. He's a decorated veteran who sacrificed more than anyone in that room could imagine. Now one powerful man must decide: protect his pride, or risk everything to honor the people he once mocked. But when greed, secrets, and betrayal threaten to destroy it all, will compassion be strong enough to win? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The first rays of dawn hadn't yet touched the windows of WilderWorks headquarters when Graham Wilder pushed through the revolving doors. His polished leather shoes clicked against the marble floor as he entered the vast lobby, the sound echoing off the towering walls. At 58, Graham carried himself with the rigid posture of someone who'd fought his way to the top, his silver-streaked hair perfectly combed, his tailored suit without a single wrinkle. He gripped his clipboard tightly, scanning the expansive space with sharp eyes. These surprise inspections had become his trademark over the years, catching people off guard, keeping them on their toes. It was how he'd built WilderWorks into the powerhouse it was today. No detail was too small, no imperfection acceptable. The lobby was mostly empty at this hour, save for the gentle whirring of a floor buffer. Graham's attention fixed on the elderly janitor, operating the machine, moving in slow, methodical circles across the marble surface. Ernest Holloway, Ernie as his name tag read, seemed lost in the rhythm of his work, unaware of the CEO's presence. Graham watched the old man's careful movements with growing irritation. The buffer hummed softly as Ernie guided it with practiced hands. But to Graham's critical eye, the pace was maddeningly slow. He could see streaks in the floor where the machine had passed, imperfections that anyone entering the building would notice. "Mr. Holloway!" Graham called out sharply, his voice cutting through the quiet morning air. Ernie looked up, his weathered face showing no surprise at the CEO's presence. He switched off the buffer and stood straight, or as straight as his aged frame would allow. "Good morning, Mr. Wilder," he said quietly, respect evident in his tone. Graham strode closer, his shoes leaving faint marks on the newly buffed surface. A group of young employees, arriving early for their shifts, gathered near the security desk, watching the scene unfold with nervous attention. "Do you call this acceptable work?" Graham gestured at the floor with his clipboard. "I can see streaks from here. At this rate, you'll still be buffing when our first clients arrive." Ernie glanced down at the floor, then back at Graham. "I'm sorry, sir. I like to make sure each section is properly—" "Properly?" Graham's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "There's nothing proper about these antiquated methods of yours. This is a Fortune 500 company, not a high school gymnasium." The young employees shifted uncomfortably, but a few nervous chuckles escaped. Graham turned to them, encouraged by their reaction. "Take note," he announced, his voice carrying across the lobby. "This is exactly what we don't want at WilderWorks. This old-timer technique might have worked in the last century, but we're in a new era. Speed and efficiency. That's what matters." Ernie's face remained composed, but his hands tightened slightly on the buffer's handle. The dignity in his bearing only seemed to irritate Graham further. "I've seen snails move faster," Graham continued, writing something on his clipboard. "If you can't keep up with our standards, perhaps it's time to consider retirement." More nervous laughter from the growing audience. The morning sun was starting to stream through the windows now, highlighting the streaks on the floor that had sparked Graham's ire. Ernie absorbed the criticism silently, his expression unchanged. When Graham finally paused, the old janitor simply nodded once. "Yes, sir. I'll do better." His voice was steady, revealing none of the humiliation he must have felt. "See that you do," Graham snapped, making one final note before turning on his heel. "And redo this entire section. Properly this time." As Graham strode toward the elevators, the young employees quickly dispersed, avoiding eye contact with either man. Ernie watched them go, then turned back to his buffer. Without a word, he switched the machine back on and resumed his work, carefully erasing the footprints Graham had left on his freshly cleaned floor. The sound of the buffer filled the lobby once more, its steady hum accompanied by the methodical movements of a man who had learned long ago that dignity wasn't measured by how others treated you, but by how you carried yourself in the face of their treatment. Ernie continued his work, each careful circle of the buffer bringing a deeper shine to the marble beneath, while high above, The morning sun climbed higher into the sky, indifferent to the small dramas playing out in its light. 2 hours had passed since Graham's harsh inspection. The marble lobby of Wilderworks gleamed under the morning sun streaming through the tall windows. Ernie had redone the floor 3 times, each pass bringing out a deeper shine that even Graham would struggle to criticize. Employees streamed in for the morning shift, their heels and dress shoes clicking against Ernie's pristine handiwork. Some offered quiet good mornings to the elderly janitor, while others hurried past with downcast eyes, still uncomfortable from witnessing his earlier humiliation. Ernie kept working, moving his cleaning cart methodically between the security gates. The morning rush meant dropped items and scattered debris, receipts, coffee cup lids, and the occasional security badge that slipped from hurried hands. He developed a routine over his years at Wilderworks, waiting until the crowd thinned before collecting these forgotten pieces of people's lives. As the lobby finally quieted, Ernie noticed a security badge lying near one of the turnstiles. He wheeled his cart to the side and made his way over, his joints protesting as he bent down to retrieve it. The movement was careful, measured, the kind of deliberate motion that comes with age and wisdom rather than weakness. But as he reached for the badge, his wallet slipped from his back pocket. It hit the marble floor with a soft thud, falling open as it landed. The contents scattered: credit cards, a worn driver's license, and 2 items Ernie kept closest to his heart: his Purple Heart medal and a weathered photograph of his old platoon. The medal skittered across the polished floor, its purple ribbon unfurling like a small flag. The photograph landed face up, its edges softened by years of handling. Young faces in military uniforms stared up from the faded image, their expressions serious, yet somehow innocent, unaware of what lay ahead. Heavy footsteps approached, the distinct sound of expensive leather shoes on marble. Graham Wilder had returned to the lobby, his attention fixed on his smartphone as he walked. He was halfway across the floor before he noticed Ernie kneeling there, gathering his belongings. Graham opened his mouth, likely to deliver another cutting remark about efficiency, but then his eyes fell on the Purple Heart. The words died in his throat. His face drained of color, as if he'd seen a ghost. The smartphone slipped from his fingers, clattering against the floor. Graham didn't seem to notice. His eyes were locked on the medal, then moved to the photograph. His hands began to shake. Ernie looked up, surprised by the sudden change in the CEO's demeanor. Gone was the imperious businessman who had mocked him hours before. In his place stood a man who seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 seconds. Graham's breathing became shallow. His usual mask of corporate confidence cracked, revealing something raw and painful underneath. Those who knew him might have recognized this expression. It was the same one he'd worn 6 years ago at Arlington National Cemetery. With trembling fingers, Graham bent down and carefully picked up the Purple Heart. He held it as if it were made of glass, his thumb brushing across its surface with unexpected gentleness. The morning sun caught the metal's surface, sending purple reflections dancing across his face. "You served?" The words came out as barely more than a whisper, so different from his earlier commanding tone that they seemed to belong to a different person entirely. Ernie nodded silently, watching as Graham struggled to maintain his composure. The CEO's hands shook more violently now as he held out the medal, offering it back to its rightful owner. The proud posture that had intimidated thousands of employees over the years crumbled. Graham's shoulders sagged, his eyes taking on a distant look as if seeing something far beyond the lobby's marble walls. Perhaps he was seeing another time, another place, a flag-draped coffin, a folded triangle of stars and stripes, the echo of a final salute. The 2 men stood frozen in this moment, connected by something deeper than corporate hierarchy. Graham's carefully constructed world of quarterly reports and shareholder meetings seemed to fade away, leaving only the weight of memory and the silence of respect that had come far too late. "Mr. Holloway," Graham called out, his voice lacking its earlier sharp edge. Would you join me for coffee? In the cafeteria?" Ernie paused, his weathered hand still gripping the buffer's handle. The elderly janitor studied Graham's face, searching for any trace of mockery, but found only genuine discomfort and something that looked like regret. "Sir, I need to finish." Ernie gestured at the floor, his voice soft but dignified. "Please," Graham interrupted, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "The floor is perfect. More than perfect. I was." He swallowed hard. "I was wrong earlier." Ernie carefully unplugged the buffer and wrapped its cord with practiced movements. Yes, sir. Coffee would be fine. They walked in silence through the quiet hallways, their footsteps echoing against the walls. The usually imposing CEO seemed smaller somehow, his shoulders tense as he led the way to the employee cafeteria. At this hour, it was nearly empty except for a few early shift workers nursing their morning coffee. Graham went straight to the coffee station, grabbing 2 ceramic mugs. How do you take it? Black is fine, thank you, Ernie replied, settling into a chair at a corner table that offered some privacy from curious onlookers. Graham returned with their coffees, setting one before Ernie with careful precision. His hands weren't quite steady. For a long moment, neither man spoke, the steam rising between them like a barrier. That photo in your wallet? Graham finally said, his voice rough. Vietnam? Ernie nodded, wrapping his fingers around the warm mug. 3rd Marine Division. 68 to 70. My brother, David. Graham's voice caught. He cleared his throat and tried again. My brother served too. Afghanistan. He didn't make it home. Understanding flickered in Ernie's dark eyes. I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Wilder. Graham, he corrected automatically. Please. Ernie took a slow sip of coffee, then reached into his pocket and pulled out the worn wallet. With gentle fingers, he extracted the faded photograph and laid it on the table between them. That's my unit. Out of 18 men in this picture, only 7 made it home. Graham leaned forward, studying the young faces frozen in time. He could easily spot Ernie, younger, but with the same quiet dignity in his stance, the same steady gaze. The guilt never really leaves you, Ernie continued softly. Why them and not me? What made me so special that I got to come home, have a family, watch my little girl grow up? He smiled, but there was pain behind it. Now, I'm raising her daughter, my Maya. Promised my Angela before she passed that I'd make sure Maya gets her education, becomes the nurse she dreams of being. Graham's coffee sat untouched, growing cold. Your daughter, car accident, 5 years ago. Her and her husband both. Ernie's fingers traced the edge of the photograph. Maya was 12. She's 17 now, smart as a whip and twice as determined. Works part-time at the grocery store after school, trying to save up for nursing school. Mr. Holloway, Graham's voice cracked with emotion. What I did this morning was inexcusable. I treated you with contempt when you deserved nothing but respect. We all have our bad days, Ernie said simply. No. Graham shook his head sharply. No excuses. I've lost sight of what matters. Seeing that Purple Heart, that photo, it reminded me of David, of what real courage looks like. He met Ernie's eyes directly. I owe you a public apology, at the very least. And perhaps there's more I can do to make this right. Ernie carefully tucked the photograph back into his wallet. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Wilder, but I appreciate the gesture. Graham, he insisted again, managing a small smile, and I do owe you, more than you know. The cafeteria was starting to fill with morning shift workers. Ernie glanced at his watch. I should get back to work. The day shift will be starting soon. Of course. Graham stood, then hesitated. Mr. Holloway, thank you. For the coffee, for sharing your story, for your service, all of it, both then and now. Ernie rose slowly, his movements careful but graceful. Thank you for listening, sir. He offered his hand, and Graham took it, noting the strength still present in the older man's grip. As they walked back toward the lobby, Graham felt the weight of what he needed to do, of the wrong he needed to right, not just for today's actions, but for something larger, something that had been missing from Wilderworks for far too long. The morning sun filtered through Wilderworks' towering glass windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble lobby. Employees filed in from various departments, their voices a low murmur as they gathered for the daily briefing. Some clutched coffee cups, others balanced tablets and notebooks, all of them stealing curious glances at their CEO, Graham Wilder, who stood near the podium looking uncharacteristically distracted. The usual sharp, commanding presence that defined Graham seemed muted. His perfectly tailored suit and carefully combed silver hair were impeccable as always, but something in his stance betrayed an inner turbulence. He kept adjusting his tie, a nervous gesture no one had ever seen from him before. In the back of the crowd, Ernie quietly pushed his cleaning cart to the side, preparing to slip away unnoticed as he always did during these meetings. But Graham's voice cut through the morning chatter. "Mr. Holloway," he called out, his tone softer than anyone had ever heard it. "Please stay." The assembled employees turned to look at Ernie, who stood frozen mid-step. A few whispered among themselves, wondering what was happening. They'd all witnessed Graham's harsh words earlier, and tension filled the air. Graham cleared his throat and stepped up to the microphone. The usual status updates and performance metrics that started every morning meeting were conspicuously absent from the podium. "Good morning," he began, his voice lacking its usual crisp authority. "Before we discuss business, I need to address something important." He paused, scanning the crowd until his eyes found Ernie. "Earlier this morning, I behaved in a way that was beneath the standards of this company, beneath any standard of human decency, really." A startled hush fell over the lobby. Graham Wilder admitting to a mistake? Several employees exchanged bewildered looks. "Mr. Ernest Holloway," Graham continued, gesturing toward the back of the room, "has worked in this building for over 15 years. Every morning, while most of us are still asleep, he's here ensuring our workplace is immaculate. And this morning, Graham's voice wavered slightly. "I treated him with contempt and disrespect." Ernie stood quietly, his dignified bearing unchanged, hands folded in front of him. The same quiet strength that had carried him through war now helped him weather this unexpected attention. "What many of you don't know, what I didn't know until today, is that Mr. Holloway is a decorated veteran who served our country with distinction." Graham's fingers brushed his own lapel, where just an hour ago he'd held Ernie's Purple Heart. "He's a man who has demonstrated more courage, dedication, and integrity than I could hope to match." The lobby had grown so quiet you could hear the gentle hum of the air conditioning. Several employees who regularly exchanged morning greetings with Ernie looked at him with new appreciation, while others seemed ashamed they'd never noticed him at all. "Mr. Holloway," Graham said, stepping away from the podium and walking toward the back of the room. Each footfall echoed in the hushed space. "I owe you an apology. Not a private one in my office, but here, in front of everyone who witnessed my behavior." He stopped in front of Ernie, who looked slightly uncomfortable with the attention but met Graham's gaze steadily. The CEO of Wilder Works, a man whose net worth was measured in billions, extended his hand to the janitor. "I am deeply sorry for my words and actions this morning. They were wrong, and they will not be repeated. Not toward you, not toward anyone in this building. We are better than that. I should be better than that." Ernie looked at the offered hand for a moment, then reached out and shook it firmly. The simple gesture carried weight, not of forgiveness freely given, but of dignity recognized and respect restored. The gathered employees, still processing this unprecedented display from their usually stoic CEO, broke into spontaneous applause. It started tentatively, but grew stronger, echoing off the marble walls and high ceiling. A few people wiped at their eyes, moved by the unexpected scene. Graham's grip on Ernie's hand remained firm, and for a moment, something passed between the two men that went deeper than words. A recognition, perhaps, of shared human experience beneath their vastly different circumstances. The hard lines around Graham's mouth had softened, and for the first time in years, his employees saw a glimpse of genuine emotion in their leader's eyes. The ruthless CEO who had built Wilder Works into an empire through sheer force of will and an often brutal business sense stood transformed, if only for a moment, into something his employees had never seen before. Simply human. Graham sat at his desk, still processing the morning's events. His fingers traced the smooth surface of his mahogany desk as he replayed the scene in his mind. The public apology, the firm handshake with Ernie, the surprised faces of his employees. For the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him, like a wall beginning to crack. A sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. Cynthia Park, Wilder Works' COO, entered his office with quick, purposeful steps. Her tailored navy suit and perfectly styled hair usually projected unwavering confidence. But today, something in her expression gave Graham pause. "Graham, we need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she approached his desk. "The board meeting just ended." Graham leaned back in his chair. "I assumed they'd be pleased with our quarterly numbers. The numbers aren't the issue. Cynthia's fingers tightened around the leather portfolio she carried. They've made a decision about cost-cutting measures. We're already running lean, Graham said, frowning. What more do they want? Cynthia took a deep breath. They're planning to outsource all janitorial services by next quarter. The proposal's already drafted. She placed a thick document on his desk. It would affect roughly 300 positions across all locations. Graham's stomach tightened. Including Ernie? Everyone, Cynthia confirmed. The board chair, Pike, is calling it non-core efficiency optimization. They estimate savings of $12 million annually. Graham stood up abruptly, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. The morning sun had risen fully now, glinting off neighboring skyscrapers. $12 million is a rounding error in our annual budget. I know, Cynthia said quietly. But Pike convinced them it's about more than just the immediate savings. He's pushing for aggressive streamlining across all support services. Graham turned back to face her. And the timing? Right after I made that public apology? Pure coincidence, apparently. Cynthia's tone suggested she believed otherwise, though Pike did mention something about maintaining appropriate professional distance from non-essential personnel. The words hit Graham like a physical blow. He thought of Ernie's quiet dignity, the Purple Heart, the photo of his granddaughter Maya he'd proudly shown during their coffee conversation. Non-essential personnel, he repeated, the phrase bitter in his mouth. Graham, Cynthia said, her voice gentler now. I understand this morning affected you, but from a purely business perspective, don't. Graham held up his hand. Don't give me the corporate rationalization. Not today. Cynthia adjusted her glasses, a habit Graham recognized as her tell when she felt conflicted. The vote is scheduled for next week's board meeting. They expect it to pass unanimously. Graham walked back to his desk, picking up the proposal. The clinical language disguised the human cost behind each bullet point and spreadsheet. 300 lives reduced to cells in an Excel document. You know how Pike operates, Cynthia continued. He's already lined up the major shareholders. Once he sets something in motion, he's not infallible, Graham interrupted. I've gone against him before. This is different. Cynthia perched on the edge of a chair. He's framing it as a test of your leadership, whether you can separate personal sentiment from sound business decisions. Graham's jaw tightened. And my public apology this morning will be seen as a momentary lapse in judgment. Cynthia's words were careful, measured. Unless you push back. Then it becomes Exhibit A, in Pike's case, against your objectivity. The morning sun continued its climb, casting Graham's shadow long across his office floor. He thought of Ernie down there somewhere, still quietly working, unaware that his job, and the jobs of hundreds like him, hung in the balance. They're people, Cynthia, he said quietly, not line items. I know. She stood, smoothing her skirt. But the board doesn't see it that way. They see numbers, efficiencies, quarterly projections. And Pike knows exactly how to speak their language. Graham stared out the window again, his reflection ghostly in the glass. The apology he'd given barely an hour ago now felt hollow, almost cruel in light of what was coming. He'd stood there, shaken Ernie's hand, promised to do better, and now hundreds of jobs were about to disappear with the stroke of a pen. The weight of it settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. This wasn't just about Ernie anymore. It was about hundreds of families, hundreds of lives that would be upended. His words of remorse would mean nothing if he couldn't prevent this. Leave the proposal, he said finally. I need to review it thoroughly. Cynthia nodded, heading for the door. She paused with her hand on the handle. Graham? Whatever you're thinking of doing, remember that Pike doesn't lose gracefully. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Graham alone with his thoughts and the damning document on his desk. Outside his window, the city stretched out below, unaware of the drama unfolding in this tower of glass and steel. Somewhere down there, Ernie continued his work, believing in the sincerity of Graham's apology, trusting in the basic dignity of honest work. The morning sun warmed Graham's face as he stood motionless, watching his city wake up. His apology, meant to be a turning point, a moment of genuine change, now felt like ash in his mouth. Unless he found a way to stop this, those words would become just another corporate platitude, empty of meaning or purpose. Graham's Mercedes felt out of place as it crawled through the quiet suburban streets. The houses here were small but well kept, with tidy front yards and American flags hanging from modest porches. His GPS directed him to turn onto Oak Street, where Ernie's single-story home waited at the end of the block. He parked behind an older model Toyota that had seen better days and checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. For the first time in years, he felt nervous about a dinner invitation. The weight of the day's revelations, both about Ernie's military service and the board's plans, sat heavy in his chest. The front yard was small, but meticulously maintained. Purple and yellow pansies lined a narrow walkway, and a well-worn welcome mat lay beneath the screen door. Graham noticed Ernie's buff cloth and cleaning supplies neatly arranged on the covered porch, the tools of his trade even at home. Before he could knock, the door swung open. A teenage girl with bright eyes and her grandfather's dignified bearing stood in the entrance. Maya Holloway wore jeans and a volunteer t-shirt from the local hospital, her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Mr. Wilder," she said, her tone careful but direct. "Grandpa said you'd be coming." She held the door open wider. "Please come in." Graham ducked his head slightly to enter the modest home. The living room was small but immaculate, every surface gleaming with the same attention to detail he'd witnessed in Ernie's work at Wilder Works. Family photos lined the walls, younger versions of Ernie in military dress, a beautiful woman who must have been Maya's mother, and Maya herself through various stages of childhood. "Evening, Mr. Wilder." Ernie emerged from the kitchen wearing a worn apron over his casual clothes. "Hope you like chicken stew. It's nothing fancy, but it's my wife's old recipe. Please, call me Graham," he said, surprising himself with the informality. "And anything home-cooked sounds perfect." Maya gestured to the couch. "Have a seat while Grandpa finishes up. Would you like some water or iced tea?" "Tea would be great, thank you." As Maya disappeared into the kitchen, Graham found himself drawn to the photos. One caught his eye, Ernie in his dress uniform receiving his Purple Heart. The image stirred memories of another ceremony, another soldier, another family left behind. "That was taken at Walter Reed," Ernie said quietly, returning to the living room. "Long time ago now." Graham nodded, unable to find the right words. His eyes moved to another photo, Maya as a toddler, held by a young woman with her same bright smile. "Your daughter?" "Yes, Sarah." Ernie's voice softened. "She and her husband passed in a car accident when Maya was 4. Drunk driver." "I'm so sorry," Graham said, the words feeling inadequate. Maya returned with their drinks, her chin lifted slightly. "Don't be. Grandpa's given me the best life anyone could ask for." She squeezed Ernie's hand, even if he does work too hard sometimes. The kitchen timer chimed, and they moved to a small dining table already set with mismatched plates and well-worn silverware. A basket of fresh rolls sat in the center, still steaming. "We always say grace before meals," Ernie explained, extending his hands to Maya and Graham. "If you'd like to join us." Graham couldn't remember the last time he'd prayed, but he took their hands, forming an unlikely circle. The rough calluses on Ernie's palm spoke of decades of hard work. "Lord," Ernie began, his voice deep and steady, "we thank you for this food and for bringing new friends to our table. Bless this meal and help us remember your grace in all things. Amen." "Amen," Maya echoed, while Graham murmured his own awkward response. The stew was simple but delicious, rich with vegetables and tender chicken. As they ate, Maya spoke about her classes and her volunteer work at the hospital. "I'm taking extra shifts in the pediatric ward," she explained, her eyes lighting up. "There's this little girl, Jenny. She's getting her tonsils out next week, and she's so scared. But I've been teaching her about the procedure using her teddy bear as a patient." She laughed. "Now she wants to be a nurse too." "Maya's got a real gift with people," Ernie said proudly. "Just like her mother." "The nursing program at City College is really good," Maya continued, stirring her stew. "I've already completed most of my prerequisites while in high school. Just need to figure out how to manage the full-time program with work." She glanced at her grandfather. "Though someone keeps telling me not to worry about that part." "The Lord provides," Ernie said simply. "We've made it this far." Graham watched their exchange, feeling something shift in his chest. Here was a man who cleaned floors for a living, raising a bright young woman with dreams of helping others. The contrast with his own life, all the deals and acquisitions, the corner office with its view of the city, suddenly felt stark. "The hospital volunteers think I'm crazy for working so hard," Maya admitted. "But they don't understand. Every patient deserves dignity and care, Even if it's just making sure their room is clean or bringing them fresh water. Grandpa taught me that. Graham set down his spoon, struck by her words. He thought of how he'd treated Ernie that morning, mocking his dedication to a job others might consider beneath them. The shame of it mixed with something else, a growing determination to make things right, not just with words, but with action. The meal continued with gentle conversation. Warm rolls passed back and forth, and moments of comfortable silence. When Graham finally stood to leave, he felt both unsettled and oddly peaceful, as if he'd glimpsed something true and important he'd been missing in his pursuit of success. The elevator doors opened silently to Graham's penthouse apartment on the 48th floor. The space stretched out before him, all gleaming marble, polished steel, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city lights below. Everything exactly where it should be, perfectly curated by his interior designer. But tonight, it felt hollow. He loosened his tie and dropped his keys onto the crystal dish by the door. The sound echoed through the empty space. No warm kitchen smells like at Ernie's house. No creaky floorboards or worn family photos lining the walls. Just pristine surfaces and carefully chosen modern art pieces that cost more than what most of his employees made in a year. Graham walked to his home office, his footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. The room was dominated by a massive mahogany desk and leather chair. Above the desk hung his most prestigious awards and business magazine covers celebrating his success. The boy wonder of Wall Street, America's youngest self-made billionaire, the king of corporate turnarounds. But his eyes went to the bottom drawer of his desk. He hadn't opened it in months. With slightly trembling fingers, Graham pulled out an old wooden box. Inside lay a folded American flag in a triangle display case, some medals, and beneath them, a photograph. He lifted it carefully, as if it might crumble in his hands. Two young men smiled back at him from the past. One was himself, maybe 20 years younger, in an expensive suit even then. The other wore desert camouflage. James, his younger brother. They stood arm in arm outside the recruitment office the day James enlisted. "I still remember what you said that day," Graham whispered to the photo. "Someone's got to do the real work while you play with spreadsheets, big brother." He sank into his chair, the leather creaking softly. The contrast between James's open, earnest face and his own ambitious smirk in the photo made his chest ache. His brother had always been the better man, the brave one, the one who thought about others first. The memory of Ernie's small dining room table flashed in his mind, the simple grace before dinner, Maya's excited chatter about her nursing classes. The way Ernie's eyes had lit up with pride when she showed Graham her textbooks. It had been so real, so different from the corporate dinners and charity galas that filled his social calendar. "You would have liked them, James," Graham said softly. "Ernie reminds me of you sometimes. That same quiet strength, that dedication to service." He remembered how James used to send letters from his deployments, always asking about the family, never complaining about the harsh conditions or danger. The last letter had arrived 3 days after the military officers knocked on their parents' door. Graham's throat tightened. He reached for the crystal decanter of scotch on his desk but stopped himself. Instead, he pulled out his phone and pulled up the company's financial projections. The board's plan to outsource janitorial services would save millions annually. On paper, it made perfect business sense. But all he could see was Ernie carefully folding his Purple Heart back into his wallet this morning, the same medal that had been pinned to James's uniform at his funeral. "I've been so focused on the bottom line," Graham admitted to the photograph. "Treating people like numbers on a spreadsheet. What would you think of me now, little brother?" He remembered the photo of Maya on Ernie's wall, her high school graduation. Ernie had worked 2 jobs to put her through private school after her parents died. Now he was helping her through nursing school, 1 shift at a time. The cleaning contract would save the company money, but at what cost? How many other Ernies would lose their livelihoods? How many other Mayas would have their dreams derailed? Graham's eyes burned as he traced his brother's face in the photograph. "I'm sorry, James. I'm sorry I forgot what really matters. What you died protecting." He thought of Ernie's quiet dignity this morning when Graham had humiliated him, the way he'd simply nodded and returned to his work. No excuse-making, no complaints, just like James would have done. The city lights twinkled beyond his windows, but Graham barely saw them. His mind was already racing, calculating risks and possibilities. The board would fight him. His shareholders might revolt. His carefully built reputation as a ruthless businessman could crumble. Looking at his brother's smile in the old photograph, Graham realized none of that mattered anymore. He couldn't let Ernie and hundreds of others lose their jobs, not when he had the power to stop it. "I can't bring you back," Graham whispered to the photo, "but maybe I can start honoring what you stood for." He carefully placed the photograph on his desk, propped against his computer monitor where he could see it. James's familiar smile seemed to hold him accountable, reminding him of the man he'd once wanted to be before quarterly profits and stock prices became his only measure of success. Graham strode into the Wilder Works boardroom at precisely 8:00 a.m. Morning light streamed through the wall of windows, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table. The air felt thick with tension. Leonard Pike sat at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his tailored suit pressed to knife-edge perfection. 8 other board members flanked him, their faces carefully neutral. Papers and tablets lay before them like weapons on a battlefield. "Good morning, everyone," Graham said, taking his seat. He noticed how Pike's fingers drummed a steady rhythm on his leather portfolio. "Graham." Pike's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We have some concerns about recent developments at Wilder Works." "Do we?" Graham kept his voice level, though his stomach tightened. Pike leaned forward. "Your public display yesterday with the janitor was theatrical. And now we hear whispers that you're reconsidering our efficiency initiatives. If you mean the plan to outsource our maintenance staff, yes, I am." Graham met Pike's gaze. "I've been reviewing the human cost." "The human cost?" Pike's laugh was sharp. "This is a corporation, not a charity. We have a responsibility to our shareholders." One of the other board members, Sarah Chen, cleared her throat. "The outsourcing plan would save us nearly $4 million annually. At the cost of hundreds of jobs," Graham countered. "Loyal employees who've served this company for years." Pike's smile thinned. "Loyalty doesn't pay dividends, Graham. You of all people should understand that. You built this company on tough decisions. Maybe some of those decisions were wrong." Graham's words hung in the air. Pike exchanged glances with the others before pulling out a folder. "Let me be clear about our position. Our analysts project a 12% increase in operational efficiency with outsourced services. The contract is ready to sign." He slid the folder across the table. Graham didn't touch it. "Furthermore," Pike continued, 3 of our major investors have expressed concerns about recent management decisions. They're worried you're losing your edge." "My edge?" Graham's voice hardened. "Because I showed basic human decency to an employee? Because you're letting emotion cloud your judgment?" Pike steepled his fingers. "That veteran janitor has become a liability. Your public apology yesterday sent our PR team scrambling. It implied previous mismanagement. It implied basic humanity." Graham shot back. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Martha Reinhardt, usually his ally, wouldn't meet his eyes. Pike stood, buttoning his jacket. "Let me be perfectly frank, Graham. This board has supported you through many controversial decisions. We've backed your aggressive expansion strategies. We've defended your sometimes harsh management style." He walked to the window, gazing out at the city below. "But if you continue to resist necessary cost-cutting measures, if you let sentimentality compromise our market position," he turned back, his expression cold, "we will be forced to consider new leadership." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Graham's jaw clenched, the muscle twitching slightly. "You're talking about removing me as CEO. It wasn't a question. We're talking about protecting this company's future." Pike returned to his seat. "The choice is yours, Graham. Sign the outsourcing agreement by the end of the week, or we'll call a special session to discuss succession planning." Graham looked around the table, seeing the mix of discomfort and resolution on the board members' faces. These were people he'd worked with for years, people who'd celebrated every quarterly earnings victory, people who now sat in silent support of Pike's ultimatum. His fingers curled into fists under the table. The choice was stark: sign away Ernie's job and betray his newfound conscience, or risk losing everything he'd built over the past 2 decades. Pike gathered his papers, the meeting clearly over. "We'll need your decision by Friday. I trust you'll make the right choice for the company." Graham remained seated as the others filed out, their expensive shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. Only Pike lingered, pausing at the door. "Don't throw away your legacy for one janitor, Graham. It's not worth it." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Graham alone in the boardroom. His gaze fell on the outsourcing contract, still sitting untouched where Pike had left it. The morning sun caught the gold Wilderworks logo embossed on the folder, making it gleam like a challenge. His career, or his conscience? The empire he'd built, or the humanity he'd rediscovered? The choice couldn't be clearer, or more difficult. Graham's jaw clenched tighter as the full weight of the situation settled over him. Everything he'd worked for now hung in the balance, all because he couldn't bring himself to sacrifice one veteran janitor's dignity. The clock on Graham's office wall ticked past midnight. The city lights twinkled far below his corner office, a constellation of artificial stars against the darkness. He sat at his desk, suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, and tie loosened. Several crumpled papers littered the floor around his wastepaper basket, evidence of hours of frustrated planning. Graham ran his hands through his silver hair, studying the fresh sheet of paper before him. The words, "Honor," "Hire," were written in bold letters across the top. Below, his normally precise handwriting had grown messier with excitement as the plan took shape. He reached for his cooling coffee, grimacing at the bitter taste. The ceramic mug, a gift from his secretary years ago, bore the faded words, "World's Grumpiest Boss." Tonight, it felt like an accusation rather than the joke it was meant to be. His eyes drifted to the framed photo on his desk. His brother James in full military dress, forever frozen at 23. "What would you think of this, Jimmy?" he murmured. Graham stood up and began to pace, his Italian leather shoes silent on the thick carpet. The plan was taking shape in his mind, becoming clearer with each step. He returned to his desk and began writing with renewed purpose. Phase 1, Veteran Employment Initiative. He paused, thinking of Maya's nursing dreams, then added, Phase 2, Family Support Program. The more he wrote, the more the ideas flowed. His hand could barely keep up with his thoughts. This wasn't just about saving Ernie's job anymore. It was about creating something meaningful, something that would have made Jimmy proud. At 2 a.m., Graham finally called his driver. "Tell Cynthia and Ruth I need them in my office first thing tomorrow," he instructed, gathering his papers. 7 a.m. sharp. The next morning, Graham arrived early, the plan refined and printed. He'd barely slept, but adrenaline kept him sharp. He stood at his office window, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, when a knock announced Cynthia's arrival. She entered, impeccable as always in a charcoal pantsuit, her dark hair swept into a precise bun. Ruth followed, her warm brown eyes curious beneath her silver-streaked hair, wearing a comfortable cardigan over her dress. "Ladies, thank you for coming in early," Graham said, gesturing to the chairs across from his desk. "I need your input on something important." Cynthia took her seat with characteristic precision, while Ruth settled in with a motherly smile. Graham remained standing, suddenly feeling like a student about to present a project. "We have a problem," he began, pacing again. "The board wants to outsource our janitorial staff, but I think I've found a solution that could transform this company." He handed them each a copy of his proposal. Ruth adjusted her reading glasses, while Cynthia immediately began scanning the document with analytical focus. "Honor, hire," Graham continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "A comprehensive program to employ veterans and support their families. We start with our existing veteran employees, like Ernie, and expand from there. Training programs, career advancement opportunities, educational support for their children." He outlined the details, watching their reactions carefully. Ruth's eyes grew misty as she read, her hand pressed to her heart. Cynthia's expression remained neutral, but her quick mind was clearly working through the implications. "The numbers," Cynthia began, her tone cautious. "Will work," Graham interrupted. "I've run them 3 times. Yes, the initial investment is significant, but look at page 4. The long-term benefits in employee retention, community goodwill, and tax incentives actually improve our bottom line within 3 years. Ruth set down her copy, wiping her eyes. "Graham," she said softly, using his first name as only she dared to do, "this isn't just a business plan. This is an answer to prayer." Cynthia tapped her pen against the proposal. "The board won't like the short-term cost impact," she said, but her tone had shifted from skeptical to thoughtful. "But the PR value alone could offset their concerns, and if we structure the implementation correctly," she began making notes in the margins. Graham felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He needed both of them for this to work, Ruth's heart and Cynthia's head.
So you think it's possible?
Ruth stood up and did something unprecedented. She hugged him. "It's more than possible," she said, stepping back with tears in her eyes. "It's necessary." Cynthia remained seated, still making notes. "It needs work," she said, finally looking up. "But," a small smile curved her lips, "I think we can make it happen. Give me 2 days to refine the financial projections." Graham nodded, feeling a surge of hope. For the first time since seeing Ernie's Purple Heart, he felt like he was doing more than just damage control. He was doing something right. Ruth dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I'll start documenting our current veteran employees," she said. "We'll need their stories, not just statistics, but real human impact." "The board meets next week," Cynthia reminded them, standing and smoothing her suit. "We'll need to move fast." She paused, studying Graham with new respect. "This is either brilliant or crazy, possibly both." Graham smiled for the first time that morning. Sometimes those are the same thing. Ruth Alvarez sat in the dimly lit records room in the basement of Wilder Works headquarters, surrounded by towering metal filing cabinets, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she flipped through yellowed personnel files from the early 1990s. The musty smell of old paper filled the air, and dust particles danced in the beam of her desk lamp. "There has to be something here," she muttered, her fingers moving methodically through the files. "Ernie's been with us so long." The clock on the wall showed 7:15 p.m., well past her usual departure time. But Ruth couldn't shake the feeling that understanding Ernie's history might help Graham's cause. She'd been at Wilder Works for over 30 years herself, and something tickled at the edge of her memory about an accident in the old warehouse. Her hands paused on a thick folder labeled Incident Reports, 1991. The binding was worn, its edges soft from years of storage. Ruth pulled it out carefully and laid it on her desk, opening it with gentle fingers. "June, July, August," she whispered, scanning through the monthly dividers. "September, here we go." Her eyes widened as she found what she was looking for. The report was typed on old letterhead, its pages slightly yellow with age. The heading read, Emergency Incident Report, Loading Dock B, September 15, 1991. Ruth leaned forward, adjusting her glasses as she began to read. Her hand flew to her mouth as the details emerged. According to the report, Jack Martinez, a foreman, had been pinned between a forklift and a wall when the machine malfunctioned. The driver had panicked, making the situation worse. It was Ernie, then a newly hired janitor, who had kept his head. He'd managed to reach the forklift's emergency release while everyone else froze, then administered first aid until paramedics arrived. "Oh my word," Ruth breathed, turning the page. There were witness statements attached, all praising Ernie's quick thinking and calm under pressure. The medical report stated that without his immediate action, Martinez might have suffered permanent injury or worse. But what struck Ruth most was the final page, a handwritten note from Ernie, declining any formal recognition. "Just doing what needed doing." He'd written in neat, humble script, "Please use any reward money to improve safety training instead." Ruth's eyes welled up as she carefully gathered the documents. The clock now showed 8:00 p.m., but she knew Graham would still be in his office. He needed to see this. Minutes later, she knocked on Graham's door, finding him hunched over budget projections for the Honor Hire program. "Ruth?" Graham looked up, surprised to see her so late. "What brings you here at this hour?" "Something you need to see," she said, placing the old report on his desk. "About Ernie." Graham's eyebrows lifted as he began reading. The office fell silent except for the soft whisper of turning pages. Ruth watched his expression change from curiosity to astonishment. "He saved Martinez's life," Graham said softly, touching the old papers with newfound reverence. "And then refused any recognition?" Ruth nodded. "That's who Ernie is. Always has been." Graham reached the final page, Ernie's handwritten note. His fingers traced the humble words, and something in his face softened further. "He's been a hero here all along," Graham whispered, still staring at the yellowed pages. The words hung in the air, heavy with realization and respect. Through the office windows, the city lights twinkled, bearing witness to a moment of profound understanding one that would only strengthen Graham's resolve to protect not just a janitor, but a man whose quiet dignity had been serving Wilderworks long before anyone had thought to notice. The grand auditorium at Wilderworks headquarters buzzed with anticipation as hundreds of employees filed in for the monthly town hall meeting. The usual corporate banners hung from the walls, but something felt different today. Instead of the typical business attire crowd, there were maintenance staff in their Navy uniforms scattered throughout the seats, including Ernie Holloway in the third row. Graham Wilder stood backstage, adjusting his tie for the fifth time. His hands trembled slightly as he reviewed his notes. This wasn't the confident CEO who typically commanded these meetings with charts and profit projections. Today, his chest felt tight with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. 2 minutes, Mr. Wilder, a young stage manager whispered. Cynthia Park appeared at his side, her expression concerned. Are you sure about this, Graham? The board? I've never been more sure. He cut her off, his voice steady despite his nerves. The house lights dimmed, and Graham walked onto the stage. The familiar podium felt like a stranger's territory today. He gripped its edges, looking out at the sea of faces, from executives in tailored suits to custodial staff in work clothes. His gaze found Ernie, sitting straight-backed and dignified despite the weight of all eyes occasionally turning his way. Good morning, Graham began, his voice catching slightly. He cleared his throat. Today's meeting will be different from our usual updates. He paused, letting the murmur of surprise ripple through the crowd. I want to start with something personal. The room fell silent. Graham Wilder and personal weren't words that usually went together. Last week, I made a terrible mistake. I humiliated one of our most valuable team members because I was caught up in my own arrogance. His eyes met Ernie's. Mr. Ernest Holloway, would you please stand? Ernie rose slowly, his expression calm and steady. Maya, who had been invited specially for this meeting, sat beside him, squeezing his hand. Mr. Holloway has worked at Wilderworks for over 30 years, but what many of you don't know is that before joining us, he served our country with distinction, earning a Purple Heart. Graham's voice grew thick with emotion. And even here, he's been a hero. Recently, we discovered that in 1991, he saved a foreman's life during a warehouse accident, then went right back to work without seeking recognition. Surprised whispers spread through the audience. Ernie remained standing, humble but proud. Mr. Holloway, I publicly apologize for my behavior. I was wrong, and I am deeply sorry. Graham stepped out from behind the podium, walking to the edge of the stage. But words aren't enough. Actions matter more. He gestured to the large screen behind him, where the words, Honor, Hire, appeared in bold letters. Today, I'm announcing a new initiative at Wilderworks. We're creating a comprehensive program to recruit, train, and support veterans in our workforce. Graham's voice grew stronger with passion. This includes full benefits, competitive wages, and, this is important, tuition assistance for veterans and their dependents. The audience stirred with interest. In the third row, Maya's eyes widened. Speaking of which, Graham continued, a small smile forming, I'd like to introduce you to Maya Holloway, Mr. Holloway's granddaughter. Maya, would you stand? Maya stood, her cheeks flushing but her head held high. Maya dreams of becoming a nurse, of helping others the way her grandfather has helped so many. Through Honor, Hire, Wilderworks will ensure she has the support to achieve that dream. Graham's eyes swept the room. This is more than a program. It's a commitment to recognizing the dignity and value of every person who works here. The energy in the room shifted. People began to lean forward in their seats, nodding, some wiping at their eyes. We're also establishing veteran-led teams throughout our facilities, creating opportunities for leadership and advancement. Because service to our country doesn't end when the uniform comes off, it takes new forms, like the quiet dedication Mr. Holloway shows every day in these halls. Graham turned directly to Ernie again. Sir, your integrity, your humility, and your unwavering commitment to excellence have taught me more in 1 week than I've learned in years of business school. You represent the best of Wilderworks, not because you polish our floors, but because you elevate our character. The first person to stand was Ruth from HR, clapping with tears streaming down her face. Like a wave, others followed. First the maintenance staff, then middle management, until the entire auditorium was on its feet. The applause thundered through the room. Ernie remained standing, and though he tried to maintain his usual composure, tears rolled silently down his weathered cheeks. Maya wrapped her arms around him, her own eyes glistening. Even Cynthia, watching from the wings, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Graham walked down the stage steps, through the audience, and directly to Ernie. He extended his hand, but Ernie pulled him into a brief, powerful hug instead. The applause grew louder, punctuated by cheers and whistles. When they pulled apart, both men's eyes were wet. Ernie whispered something only Graham could hear, and the CEO nodded, visibly moved. The standing ovation continued, a spontaneous celebration of redemption, respect, and the promise of change. In that moment, as Graham looked around at the crying, clapping crowd, at Maya's beaming face, at Ernie's quiet dignity, he knew that whatever the board might do to him later, this was right. This was what leadership truly meant. The underground parking garage was almost empty at 9 p.m., the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows between the concrete pillars. Graham's footsteps echoed as he walked toward his Tesla, his mind still buzzing from the successful town hall meeting. The employees' standing ovation and Ernie's quiet tears of gratitude had made him feel, for the first time in years, that he was doing something truly meaningful. A sharp click of dress shoes against concrete made him turn. Leonard Pike emerged from behind a pillar, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He wore his usual perfectly tailored suit, but his typically smooth expression was twisted into something harder. "Quite the performance today, Graham," Pike's voice carried across the garage, dripping with sarcasm. "Very touching. The janitor, the Purple Heart, the disadvantaged granddaughter. You hit all the emotional notes." Graham squared his shoulders. "It wasn't a performance, Leonard. This program will work. The numbers—" "Oh, spare me." Pike pulled a thick manila folder from his briefcase. "You want numbers? I've got them right here." He slapped the dossier against Graham's chest. "Our shareholders are already nervous about Q3 projections. Operating costs are up 12% from last year. And now you want to add an expensive veterans program?" Graham caught the folder before it could fall. "The pilot data shows lower turnover rates, higher employee satisfaction." "Wake up!" Pike's voice bounced off the concrete walls. "This isn't a charity. It's a Fortune 500 company. Your brother's death may have left you with a guilty conscience, but that's your problem, not the shareholders." Graham's fingers tightened on the folder. The mention of his brother sent a familiar ache through his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "Leave him out of this." "Why should I?" Pike stepped closer, his cologne too strong in the enclosed space. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? You couldn't save him, so now you're trying to save every veteran who crosses your path. It's pathetic." Graham thought of Ernie's quiet dignity that morning, of Maya's dreams of nursing school, of the pride in the maintenance staff's eyes when he'd announced the program. "You're wrong. This isn't about guilt. It's about doing what's right for our people." "Your people?" Pike laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "They're employees, Graham. Replaceable ones at that. And if you keep pushing this sentimental nonsense, you'll be out. The board won't hesitate to remove a CEO who's lost his edge." "Is that a threat?" "Consider it a friendly warning." Pike straightened his tie. "You have until the end of the week to kill this program. Otherwise, I'll call an emergency board meeting, and we both know how that will end." The older man turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the darkness of the garage. Graham stood there, the dossier heavy in his hands, his heart pounding. The triumph of the town hall felt distant now, replaced by a cold knot of fear in his stomach. He got into his car but didn't start it immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes and remembered that morning in the lobby, Ernie's Purple Heart falling from his wallet, the weathered photo of his platoon, the way the old veteran's hands had shaken slightly as he picked them up. Graham had seen the same quiet strength in his brother's eyes, the kind that came from facing death and choosing to serve anyway. The memory steadied him. Pike could threaten all he wanted, but Graham had made a promise not just to Ernie and Maya, but to himself. He wouldn't back down, not this time. His brother would have expected nothing less. Graham's fingers found the steering wheel, gripping it with renewed determination. The numbers in Pike's dossier might be daunting, but they weren't the whole story. There was value that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports or shareholder dividends, the value of dignity, of second chances, of keeping promises. He started the car, the electric motor humming to life. In his mind, he could still see Ernie's purple heart glinting under the lobby lights. That small piece of metal represented everything Pike would never understand: sacrifice, honor, the courage to stand up for what was right. The Tesla's headlights cut through the darkness as Graham drove toward the exit. His hands were steady now, despite Pike's threats echoing in his mind. He might lose his position, his wealth, everything he'd spent decades building, but he wouldn't lose his humanity. Not again. The evening sun cast long shadows across the church parking lot as Graham pulled up in his Tesla, feeling distinctly out of place among the well-worn sedans and pickup trucks. He tugged at his casual sweater, the most informal thing he owned, and wished he hadn't let Ruth talk him into this. "You made it!" Ruth's warm voice called from the church steps. She hurried down to meet him, her silver hair catching the golden light. "I was worried you might change your mind." Graham managed a tight smile. "I considered it about 20 times on the drive here." "Well, I'm glad you didn't." Ruth patted his arm. "Come on, everyone's down in the basement. And don't worry, they're just people, Graham. No board members or shareholders here." The basement was a humble space, with linoleum floors and folding tables laden with casseroles, salads, and desserts. The smell of coffee and home cooking filled the air. About 30 people milled around, talking and laughing, their paper plates piled high. Ruth guided Graham toward the buffet line. "Get yourself something to eat. Mrs. Martinez's enchiladas are legendary." An older man with a Marine Corps cap nodded as Graham passed. "Evening, brother. First time here?" "Yes, I'm just visiting." Graham filled his plate mechanically, hyper-aware of how out of his element he felt. Ruth steered him toward a table where 3 couples sat. "Everyone, this is Graham. Graham, meet Tom and Sarah." Tom served in Desert Storm, and that's Mike and Jenny and Marcus and Carol. They welcomed him warmly, making space at the table. Tom's weathered face creased in a smile. "Ruth mentioned you're working on a veteran employment program?" Graham set down his plate. "Yes, we're calling it Honor Hire. The idea is to—" "It's about time somebody did something like that," Marcus cut in, his voice thick with emotion. "Took me 2 years to find steady work after coming home. Nobody wants to hire a guy who jumps at loud noises." Jenny reached across the table to squeeze Marcus's hand. "Our Marcus was a mess when he first got back. PTSD had him sleeping in the garage because the bedroom felt too confining. But look at him now, shift supervisor at the plant, 3 kids in college." Graham listened, his throat tight, as stories flowed around the table. Sarah talked about the wives' support group she ran. Mike described his struggles with civilian job applications that couldn't capture his military leadership experience. Their voices were matter-of-fact, free of self-pity, yet heavy with shared understanding. A young woman at the next table turned around. "Mr. Wilder? I'm Lisa, my husband. He didn't make it back. But our son just started community college on the GI Bill." Her eyes welled up. "Programs like yours, they matter. They tell our families we're not forgotten." Graham's chest ached. These weren't statistics or PR opportunities. These were lives, families, dreams put on hold and pieced back together. Tom leaned forward. "You know what's hardest after service? Feeling useful again. Having purpose. A paycheck matters, sure, but dignity matters more. Knowing somebody sees your value, like your janitor friend Ernie," Ruth added softly. 30 years of faithful service, never missing a shift. The conversations around them quieted as Pastor Dan called everyone to join hands for the evening prayer. Graham felt rough palms and gentle fingers link with his own. He bowed his head, uncomfortable but unwilling to break the circle. "Lord," Pastor Dan's voice filled the basement, "we thank you for bringing us together tonight, for the fellowship we share, for the burdens we carry together, and for new friends who remind us that we're not alone in our struggles." Graham's eyes burned behind his closed lids. The warmth of joined hands, the quiet amens, the weight of shared stories, it all pressed against the walls he'd built around his heart. He thought of his brother's funeral, of standing stiff and proper while their mother wept. He thought of Ernie buffing floors at dawn, carrying his purple heart without fanfare. A single tear slid down his cheek. Ruth's hand squeezed his gently, and something inside him, some ancient, icy barrier, cracked and began to thaw. In that fluorescent-lit church basement, Surrounded by veterans and families who had lost so much yet gave so freely, Graham Wilder's heart began to heal. "Amen," the group murmured. "Amen," Graham whispered, his voice rough with tears. Graham stood at the podium in Wilder Works' main training center, his hands steady on the polished wood as he looked out at the gathered crowd. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, catching the brass buttons on Ernie's freshly pressed suit jacket. The elderly veteran sat in the front row, his usual humble smile touched with something that looked like pride. "Today marks more than just a new program," Graham began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "It marks a change in how Wilder Works sees its responsibility to our community and our veterans." The pilot program's details were laid out on bright banners behind him. Honor Hire Veterans leading the way. The initiative would start at 3 locations, with plans to expand based on success metrics. But the heart of it was right there in the front row. "Our first veteran advisor," Graham continued, "is someone who taught me more about leadership in one day than I learned in 20 years of running this company." He gestured to Ernie. "Mr. Ernest Holloway, would you please join me?" Ernie rose slowly, straightening his tie as he walked to the podium. There was nothing of the hesitant janitor in his bearing now. His shoulders were square, his chin high, the dignity that had always been there now visible for everyone to see. Ruth from HR brought forward a framed certificate and a new company ID badge. The title read Senior Veteran Affairs Advisor, and Graham felt a flutter of satisfaction seeing Ernie's name printed in gold letters. "This position," Graham explained to the assembled press and employees, "comes with full benefits, flexible hours, and direct input into our veteran hiring and training programs." He turned to Ernie. "You'll help us identify other veterans who can lead similar programs at our other locations." Ernie accepted the certificate with a firm handshake. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I'll do my best to help others find the same chance I did." The applause was genuine and warm. In the second row, Maya wiped tears from her eyes, beaming at her grandfather. She'd started her nursing prerequisites last week, thanks to the program's educational benefits. After the ceremony, Graham walked Ernie through the newly renovated training floor. The space had been transformed from sterile corporate rooms into something more welcoming. The walls featured military service photographs donated by employees, and comfortable meeting areas encouraged conversation and mentorship. "What do you think?" Graham asked, watching Ernie take it all in. "It's not just about cleaning floors anymore, is it?" Ernie replied thoughtfully. "It's about giving people back their dignity." A young reporter from the local news station approached them, notebook in hand. "Mr. Wilder, your board of directors initially opposed this program. What made you push forward despite the resistance?" Graham glanced at Ernie, remembering that first morning with the Purple Heart. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "you meet someone who reminds you what really matters. Success isn't just about profit margins," the reporter scribbled quickly. "And the program details? How exactly will it work?" "Veterans will lead teams in facilities management, security, and maintenance," Graham explained. "But they'll also mentor newer employees, sharing their leadership experience. We're partnering with local colleges for certification programs and offering tuition assistance for veterans and their families." More questions followed, but Graham noticed Ernie had drifted to a quiet corner where a group of job applicants waited. The veteran was already at work, speaking softly with a young woman in a worn army jacket, her posture gradually relaxing as they talked. Later that afternoon, Graham sat in his office, reading the first online coverage of the announcement. The headlines were better than any PR firm could have crafted. "Wilder Works CEO champions veteran employment. Corporate giant shows heart," and his favorite, "The CEO with a conscience, Graham Wilder's mission to honor veterans." But it wasn't the positive press that made him smile. It was the memory of Ernie's face when he saw his new office, small but dignified, with a window and a desk where he could make a real difference in people's lives. Ruth knocked and entered with a stack of applications. "Sir, we've already had 50 veterans apply at just the pilot locations. And look at these qualifications. We're getting exactly the kind of leadership experience you hoped for." Graham nodded, thinking of his brother. For the first time in years, he felt he was doing something that would have made James proud. The profit projections could wait. Right now, he had a different kind of success to celebrate. Looking out his window at the city skyline, Graham felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time: genuine pride. Not in the building that bore his name or the stock price on his computer screen, but in the knowledge that he'd finally found a way to use his position to lift others up instead of looking down on them. The pilot program was just the beginning. In his mind, he could already see it spreading across all their locations, creating a network of support and opportunity for veterans and their families. And it had started with one humbling moment, when a janitor's Purple Heart had opened his eyes to the real meaning of service and dignity. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Ernie's small front yard as Graham's luxury sedan pulled up to the curb. The contrast between his vehicle and the modest neighborhood hadn't escaped him anymore. Instead, it reminded him of how much he'd learned about true wealth these past weeks. Graham smoothed his tie and grabbed the small gift bag from his passenger seat. His designer shoes crunched on the neatly swept walkway as he approached the familiar front door with its welcome mat that read, "Bless this home." Before he could knock, Maya flung the door open, practically bouncing with excitement. Her eyes were bright, and she clutched a thick envelope in her hands. "Mr. Wilder, you came." She beamed at him, looking more like an eager child than the composed young woman he'd come to know. "I wouldn't miss this for anything," Graham replied, surprised by how much he meant it. "And please, it's Graham." Ernie appeared behind his granddaughter, his weathered face creased in a warm smile. "Come on in, sir. Maya's been watching out the window since you texted." The house smelled of fresh-baked cookies and furniture polish, a combination Graham now associated with comfort. The living room was spotless as always, family photos arranged perfectly on the walls. He noticed a new one. Maya in her graduation cap and gown from last month. "So," Graham said, settling into what he'd come to think of as his armchair, "I heard there was some news?" Maya could barely contain herself. She thrust the envelope toward him, hands trembling slightly. "Look." Graham carefully removed the letter, though he already knew what it said. He'd made some calls, but Maya's grades and determination had done most of the work. His eyes scanned the formal letterhead. "Dear Miss Holloway, we are pleased to inform you of your acceptance. Full scholarship to the nursing program." Maya's voice cracked with emotion. I never thought." Before Graham could respond, Maya launched herself at him, wrapping him in a fierce hug. He stiffened for a moment. Physical affection wasn't his norm, but then relaxed, patting her back awkwardly. "You earned this," he said firmly. "Every bit of it." Ernie watched from his recliner, eyes glistening. "My baby girl's gonna be a nurse, just like her mama wanted." Maya wiped her eyes, straightening up. "I'm going to make you both proud. I promise." "You already have," Graham and Ernie said simultaneously, then shared a knowing look. "Oh!" Graham remembered the gift bag. A small celebration present. He handed it to Maya. She reached inside and pulled out a professional-grade stethoscope, its metal gleaming. These are expensive." "Every nurse needs proper tools," Graham shrugged. "The program coordinator recommended this model." Maya traced the instrument reverently. "Thank you for everything." Ernie stood slowly. "This calls for my special iced tea. Maya, help your old grandpa in the kitchen?" When they left, Graham walked to the wall of photos. His eye caught one he hadn't noticed before. A much younger Ernie in uniform, arm around a beautiful woman who had Maya's smile. Must be her mother, he thought. "That's my Sarah." Ernie's voice came from behind him. He handed Graham a tall glass of amber tea. "Maya looks more like her every day. She would be proud," Graham said softly. "Of both of you." They settled back into their seats as Maya returned with a plate of cookies. The conversation flowed easily now, nothing like the tense coffee meeting weeks ago. Maya shared her plans for school, her eyes shining with possibility. Ernie told stories about his daughter's nursing career, his voice warm with memory rather than heavy with loss. Graham sipped his tea, watching them. The drink was sweet but not cloying, with a hint of mint, much like this moment. He thought about his brother, wondering if he was watching somehow. Would he be proud of this small redemption? "A toast." Graham raised his glass. "To new beginnings." Ernie lifted his glass, ice cubes clinking softly. "To dreams coming true." Maya held up her glass of tea, grinning. "To family. The ones we're born with and the ones we find along the way." They clinked glasses in the warm afternoon light. Graham caught Ernie's eye over their drinks, and both men shared a smile. The future, for all its uncertainties, felt brighter than it had in years. Leonard Pike sat in his darkened office, a satisfied smile playing across his face as he watched the edited video clip for the 100th time. On his ultra-wide monitor, Graham's passionate town hall speech had been carefully trimmed and rearranged, making his honor hire announcement sound like the ravings of an unstable executive. "We're going to redirect millions in shareholder value." Graham's voice boomed through Pike's speakers, the context of veteran support completely removed. "Profits aren't our priority anymore." Pike pressed send on the email to his media contacts. Within hours, the doctored footage spread across financial news networks like wildfire. At home, Graham nearly choked on his morning coffee as he watched the markets open. Wilderworks stock was in free fall, down 15% in the first hour of trading. His phone buzzed constantly with panicked messages from board members and major investors. "Have you seen the news?" Cynthia's voice was tense when Graham answered her call. "Pike leaked that edited footage to every financial outlet in the country. It's a disaster." Graham switched channels on his TV. The headline screamed across the screen. "Wilderworks CEO goes rogue. Shareholders panic as Wilder abandons profit focus. Board questions CEO's stability." "They're taking everything out of context," Graham growled, pacing his living room. "Where's the part about improved retention rates? The cost savings from reduced turnover?" "Pike made sure none of that made it into the clips," Cynthia replied. "He's painting you as an emotional liability who's lost touch with business reality." Graham's hands shook as he loosened his tie. "Call an emergency press conference. We need to show the full footage." "It's too late," Cynthia said softly. "The board's already called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. Pike's got them convinced you're going to tank the company." At Wilderworks headquarters, Ernie worked his regular morning shift, trying to ignore the nervous whispers of employees huddled around their phones and computers. The stock price ticker in the lobby kept flashing lower and lower numbers, each drop feeling like a personal blow. "Mr. Holloway?" Ruth from HR approached him, her eyes red, rimmed. "Maybe you should take the day off. Things are getting pretty intense around here." Ernie shook his head, gripping his mop handle tighter. "Can't do that, Ms. Ruth. Got floors to finish." The emergency board meeting convened at 2 o'clock. Graham stood before the gathered members, his usual commanding presence diminished by the hostile stares around the table. Pike sat at the far end, his expression one of manufactured concern. "The numbers don't lie," Pike announced, sliding financial projections across the polished surface. "Mr. Wilder's recent, emotional decisions have put shareholder value at serious risk. The market's reaction today proves it." "Those numbers are cherry-picked," Graham protested, his voice rising. "If you'd look at the complete data from our pilot programs." "We've seen quite enough," Pike interrupted smoothly. "The board has already voted. Effective immediately. You're suspended pending a full investigation of your fitness to lead this company." The words hit Graham like physical blows. He looked around the table, searching for allies, but found only averted eyes and uncomfortable shuffling. "You can't do this," he said. But his voice had lost its strength. "Security will escort you out," Pike continued, pressing a button on his desk phone. "Please surrender your credentials and company devices." Down in the lobby, Ernie felt his chest tighten as he watched Graham being led out by security guards. The CEO's shoulders were slumped, his face ashen. Their eyes met briefly across the marble floor, the same floor where their story had begun weeks ago. The stress of the moment overwhelmed Ernie. His vision blurred, and the mop handle slipped from his grasp. He tried to catch it, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. The last thing he heard was Ruth's alarmed cry as the polished floor rushed up to meet him. "Someone call an ambulance!" Ruth's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Mr. Holloway? Ernie? Can you hear me?" The lobby erupted into chaos. Employees gathered around Ernie's still form as Ruth checked his pulse with trembling fingers. Outside the glass doors, Graham struggled against the security guards, trying to get back inside after hearing the commotion. "Let me go!" he shouted. "That's my friend in there!" But the guards held firm, following Pike's strict orders. Graham could only watch helplessly as paramedics rushed past him with a stretcher, their urgent movements reflecting the blue emergency lights that now painted the lobby in surreal colors. Pike observed the scene from his office window high above, his expression unreadable. He'd won. The threat to his vision of corporate efficiency had been neutralized. The fact that it had cost two good men their dignity seemed irrelevant to him. The ambulance pulled away from Wilderworks headquarters, its sirens wailing into the gathering dusk. Inside the building, Ruth wiped tears from her eyes as she picked up Ernie's fallen mop. The lobby's polished floor reflected the chaos of the day. Scuff marks from rushing feet, the forgotten cleaning supplies, and the memory of 2 lives unraveling in a matter of hours. The stock price continued its relentless decline as trading closed for the day. In the echo of that long afternoon, Wilderworks felt like a different place. Colder, harder, more like the soulless corporation it had been before a chance encounter between a proud CEO and a humble janitor had briefly promised to change everything. Maya received the call about her grandfather while studying at the library. Her textbooks forgotten, she rushed to the hospital, her dreams of nursing school suddenly feeling very far away. The day that had started with so much hope had crumbled into uncertainty and fear. Graham's Tesla screeched to a halt in the hospital parking lot, his normally pristine suit wrinkled and his tie askew. His hands trembled as he fumbled with his seatbelt. The call from Maya had sent ice through his veins. "Lolo collapsed at work. Please come." The emergency room's automatic doors whooshed open, releasing a blast of antiseptic-scented air. Graham's expensive leather shoes squeaked against the polished linoleum as he rushed to the information desk. Before he could speak, he heard Maya's voice. "Mr. Wilder, over here." He turned to see Maya rising from a worn waiting room chair, her eyes red and puffy. Her Wilderworks student volunteer badge still hung around her neck, a cruel reminder that everything had been fine just hours ago. "Maya," Graham said softly, crossing the space between them in quick strides. "What happened? How is he?" Maya wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. "They said it was stress and exhaustion. His blood pressure went way up." Her voice cracked. He was buffing the executive floor when he just crumpled. Graham's chest tightened. The executive floor, where just this morning the board had suspended him, where Pike's poison had begun to spread. "Can we see him?" Graham asked. Placing a gentle hand on Maya's shoulder, she nodded, leading him down a corridor lined with privacy curtains. They moved him to a room for observation. "He's awake now, but—" She swallowed hard. "I've never seen him look so tired, Mr. Wilder." They reached room 214. Through the window, Graham could see Ernie propped up in bed, looking small against the white sheets. An IV dripped steadily beside him, and a blood pressure monitor beeped in quiet rhythm. Maya pushed the door open. "Lolo? Mr. Wilder's here." Ernie's eyes fluttered open, and he managed a weak smile. "Graham, you didn't have to come all this way." "Of course I did," Graham said, moving to the bedside. The sight of the proud veteran looking so fragile made his throat tight. "How are you feeling?" "Just a little woozy is all," Ernie said, trying to sit up straighter. "Don't know what came over me. Never missed a day of work in my life." Maya dabbed at fresh tears. "The doctor said you've been pushing yourself too hard, Lolo, working extra shifts, staying late." "The floors don't polish themselves, sweet pea," Ernie said softly. Graham's guilt crashed over him like a wave. He knew why Ernie had been working overtime, to save extra money for Maya's nursing school, worried about the rumors of outsourcing that had been spreading through the maintenance staff. "Ernie," Graham said, lowering himself into the chair beside the bed. "I need you to listen to me. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault." "Mr. Wilder," Maya interrupted, her voice trembling with sudden anger. "What's happening at the company? Everyone's talking about some video, and the stock dropping, and—" She took a shaky breath. "Is Lolo going to lose his job?" Graham met her fierce gaze, seeing the same protective spirit that had made Ernie save that foreman all those years ago. "Maya, I promise you, don't make promises you can't keep, son," Ernie said quietly. "I heard about your suspension. These old ears still work just fine." The room fell silent, except for the steady beep of the monitor. Graham looked at his hands, remembering how they'd trembled that first morning when he discovered Ernie's Purple Heart. Now they trembled again, but for a different reason. Rage at Pike's manipulation, at his own powerlessness to protect this family that had come to mean so much to him. "Maya," Ernie said suddenly, "would you mind getting your old grandfather some water?" She hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave. "Lolo, please, sweet pea. My throat's a bit dry from all this talking." Once Maya had left the room, Ernie turned his tired eyes to Graham. "You're carrying too much weight, son. I can see it in your face." Graham let out a bitter laugh. "I'm carrying too much? You're the one in a hospital bed. The Lord gives us burdens for a reason, Ernie said. Sometimes to humble us. Sometimes to show us what we're really made of. I'm not sure I'm made of anything worth showing right now, Graham admitted. Pike twisted everything. Made me look unstable, reckless. The board suspended me, and without my position, I can't protect you or the other workers. Ernie's weathered hand reached out, and Graham found himself taking it, surprised by the strength still present in that grip. You know what I learned in the service? Ernie asked. The real battles aren't won with strength. They're won with heart, with doing what's right, even when it costs you everything. His eyes grew distant. I lost brothers over there, good men, but they died believing in something bigger than themselves. Graham felt tears threatening. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this fight, Ernie. I'm not a hero like you. Nobody's born a hero, Graham. We become one by standing up when it matters. Ernie squeezed his hand. Now, I'm going to say a prayer for you, if that's all right. Graham nodded, unable to speak. Ernie closed his eyes. Lord, give this good man strength for the battle ahead. Help him remember he doesn't fight alone, and show him that sometimes our greatest victories come after our darkest hours. Amen. Amen, Graham whispered, holding tight to Ernie's hand. I won't give up. I promise you that. Ernie's eyes were heavy with fatigue, but his voice was clear as he whispered, Our Father who art in heaven. The familiar prayer continued softly as Maya returned with the water, her footsteps quiet on the hospital floor. Graham remained still, letting Ernie's words wash over him, finding strength in their simple faith. The fluorescent lights in the hospital hallway buzzed overhead as Graham wandered away from Ernie's room. His footsteps echoed against the sterile floors until he found himself at the entrance to the hospital chapel. The small room was empty, lit only by a few electric candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Graham slipped into the back pew, his shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. He hadn't set foot in a chapel since his brother James's funeral 15 years ago. The familiar scent of wood polish and old hymnals brought back memories he'd spent years trying to forget. I don't even know how to do this anymore, he whispered to the empty room, his voice cracked. I'm not sure I deserve to be here after what I did. The silence seemed to press in around him. Graham loosened his tie and ran his fingers through his gray-streaked hair. I mocked a good man, he continued, his words barely audible. I stood there in that lobby, clipboard in hand, acting like some kind of king. And for what? To feel powerful for a few minutes? He let out a bitter laugh. I treated Ernie exactly like the kind of person James would have hated. Tears began to well up in his eyes. He blinked them back, but they fell anyway. James always said I was too focused on money, on success. There's more to life than the bottom line, little brother, he'd tell me. Graham pulled out his wallet and extracted a worn photograph. In it, a younger James stood in his dress uniform, arm thrown around Graham's shoulders at a family barbecue. You were right, Jamie. You were always right. The chapel's silence seemed to soften, becoming less accusatory and more contemplative. Graham traced his brother's face in the photo with his thumb. I let you down. When you died, I just hardened, buried myself in work, told myself I was honoring your memory by being successful. He shook his head. But that was a lie. I was hiding. And then I saw Ernie's Purple Heart, and it was like seeing you again. Graham's voice grew stronger, though tears still streaked his cheeks. Ernie has everything you valued: dignity, humility, service to others. He reminds me so much of you. And what did I do? I humiliated him. Just like those stuck-up executives you used to complain about. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head bowed. Now Pike and the board are trying to destroy everything we've built with honor hire. They're going to hurt hundreds of veterans and their families. People like Ernie. People like you were. The electric candles flickered, creating shifting patterns on the chapel walls. Graham sat up straighter, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. I'm sorry, James. I'm sorry I lost my way. I'm sorry I became exactly what you warned me against. He took a deep breath. But maybe that's why all this is happening. Maybe I needed to meet Ernie to remember who I'm supposed to be. Graham stood up slowly, his knees cracking. He walked to the front of the chapel where the electric candles sat. Their artificial light wasn't as warm as real candles, but something about their steady glow was comforting. I don't know if you can hear me, Jamie, but I promise you this. I won't let them win. Not Pike, not the board, not anyone who thinks profit matters more than people. His voice grew firmer with each word. I'll fight for Ernie and every other veteran at Wilderworks. I'll fight for Maya's future. I'll fight for the kind of company you would have been proud of. He touched the cool metal of the candle holder, feeling its smooth surface under his fingertips. I might lose everything. My job, my reputation, maybe even the company. But I won't lose my soul. Not again. The chapel remained quiet, but the silence no longer felt empty. Instead, it felt like the calm before a storm, not one of destruction, but of cleansing, of renewal. Graham straightened his tie and squared his shoulders. The tears had dried on his cheeks, leaving behind something harder, more determined. He carefully tucked the photo of James back into his wallet. In that moment, surrounded by the gentle glow of electric candles and the weight of 15 years of regret, Graham felt something shift inside him. The fear and uncertainty didn't vanish. They were still there, prowling at the edges of his mind, but they no longer controlled him. A resolve crystallized in his chest, as solid as the marble floors of his company lobby, and as unshakable as Ernie's quiet dignity. He would fight, not with the cold, calculating precision that had built his fortune, but with the warmth and conviction he'd buried along with his brother. He touched his fingers to his lips, and then to the candle holder, in a gesture of farewell. To the chapel, to his guilt, and to the man he used to be. The man who had mocked a veteran for doing honest work. The man who had forgotten his brother's most important lessons. That man was gone now. Graham sat in his home office, surrounded by scattered papers and empty coffee cups. The morning sun cast long shadows across his desk as he stared at his brother's photo, wondering if he'd lost everything trying to do the right thing. A gentle knock at the door broke his concentration. "Come in," he called out, straightening his tie reflexively. Ruth Alvarez entered first, her warm presence filling the room despite her small frame. Behind her, Cynthia Parks strode in with purpose, clutching a thick folder to her chest. The contrast between Ruth's gentle demeanor and Cynthia's sharp business attire struck Graham as they settled into the chairs across from him. "We've been busy," Cynthia announced, spreading documents across his desk with practiced efficiency. "The pilot program data just came in." Graham leaned forward, his eyes scanning the charts and graphs. "These numbers are remarkable," Ruth finished, her eyes twinkling. "The veteran-led cleaning teams have increased cleanliness scores by 32%. Cynthia pointed to another chart. Turnover in those departments dropped to nearly zero. The savings in training and recruitment alone offset the higher wages. Graham's hands trembled slightly as he picked up a customer satisfaction report. The numbers jumped off the page. Clear, undeniable evidence that his instincts had been right. "There's more," Ruth added, pulling out a stack of handwritten letters. "These are from clients. They're noticing the difference." One executive wrote specifically about how much safer she feels with veterans on night shift. "Pike's numbers were selective," Cynthia said, her usually guarded expression softening. "He cherry-picked data from the implementation phase, ignored the long-term projections. I should have seen it sooner." She paused, straightening her blazer. "I was wrong, Graham. This program works." Graham sat back, processing. "It won't be enough for the board. Pike has them convinced. That's why we're here," Ruth interrupted, reaching for his hand. "The shareholder meeting next week. We have a plan." Cynthia nodded, pulling out another folder. "I've been making calls. Remember Thomas Chen, the tech investor who always advocated for social responsibility? He controls 8% of voting shares," Graham recalled. "And he's willing to hear us out. There are others, too. Smaller shareholders who remember when Wilderworks stood for something more than quarterly profits." Ruth's eyes lit up. "And I've gathered testimonies. The Foreman's family from the 91 accident, they're willing to speak. Veterans groups, business leaders who've seen the pilot's success. Even Maya recorded a beautiful statement about what the scholarship means to her family." Graham stood, pacing behind his desk. The weight of the past weeks showed in his stance, but there was a new energy in his movement. "Pike will fight dirty. He'll try to paint this as emotional manipulation." "Let him," Cynthia declared with unexpected fierceness. "I've run the numbers every way possible. This program isn't just morally right, it's good business. Lower turnover means consistent quality. Happy employees mean better service. The PR value alone. She stopped, catching herself. But that's not why we're doing this, is it? Graham picked up his brother's photo, studying it for a moment. No, it's not. It's about seeing people for who they really are, about giving them the dignity they deserve. He set the photo down carefully. Ernie taught me that. Ruth smiled, her eyes misty. He's doing better, by the way. The doctors say he can go home tomorrow. Good. Graham nodded. He should be there to see this through. He turned to Cynthia. You're risking your position too, you know. Supporting me could end your career here if we fail. Cynthia straightened in her chair, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine conviction. Some things are worth the risk. I've spent 20 years translating human value into profit margins. Maybe it's time to let the humanity speak for itself. They spent the next hour planning their strategy. Cynthia outlined the financial presentation while Ruth organized the testimonies. Graham made calls to key shareholders, his voice growing stronger with each conversation. By afternoon, their small resistance had grown. Department heads offered data supporting the program's success. Employees volunteered to speak about the changes they'd witnessed. Even some board members began to waver, reaching out privately to express doubts about Pike's leadership. We'll need to prepare for every possible argument, Cynthia said, checking her notes. Pike will try to discredit the data, claim it's too small a sample size. Then we'll show them the trend lines, Graham replied, energy returning to his voice. The improvement curves, the satisfaction scores, everything, Ruth added softly. And we'll remind them that behind every number is a person, a veteran like Ernie, a student like Maya, a family trying to build a better life. Graham looked at the two women who had become his unlikely allies, the pragmatic COO and the compassionate HR director. Together, they represented everything WilderWorks could be: profitable and purposeful, efficient and ethical. Thank you, he said simply. Both of you. For believing in this, Cynthia smiled, a rare sight that transformed her usual stern expression. The numbers don't lie, Graham. But more importantly, neither does the heart when it knows what's right. Ruth gathered her papers, patting Graham's hand. We have 4 days until the shareholder meeting. God didn't bring us this far to fail now. As they prepared to leave, Graham picked up one of the testimonial letters. It was from a night shift supervisor, describing how a veteran on his team had helped a lost child find their parent during a late cleaning shift. The simple act of kindness, the extra time taken, it was everything the program stood for. Send me everything tonight, he said. Every number, every letter, every testimony. I'll start preparing my presentation. Cynthia nodded approvingly. I'll have the financial projections updated by morning. The 5-year forecast will show them this isn't just a temporary feel-good measure. And I'll bring Ernie's story, Ruth added. The whole story, not just the parts Pike wants them to see. They left Graham's office with renewed purpose, their footsteps echoing with determination down the hallway. Through his window, Graham could see the WilderWorks logo gleaming on the building across the street. Soon he would find out if the company he'd built could become something even greater, a place where profit and compassion walked hand in hand. The community center buzzed with nervous energy as people filed into the cramped meeting room. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the crowd of WilderWorks employees, veterans, and local residents who had come to show their support. Handmade signs reading "Save Our Jobs" and "Veterans Matter" dotted the audience. Maya Holloway stood behind the podium, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the microphone. She wore her grandfather's old Navy baseball cap, the brim worn soft from years of use. Local news cameras pointed their lenses at her young face, and reporters scribbled in their notepads. My grandfather. Maya's voice cracked, but she took a deep breath and started again. My grandfather, Ernest Holloway, has worked at WilderWorks for 27 years. He's the kind of person who shows up 2 hours early just to make sure the floors shine perfect for everyone else's day. The room fell silent, hanging on her every word. In the back, Ruth dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, while Cynthia recorded everything on her phone. When I was 6 years old, my parents died in a car accident, Maya continued, her voice growing stronger. Lolo Ernie, that's what I call him. He could have put me in foster care. He was already 60. But instead, he picked up extra shifts. He worked holidays. He never complained, not once. She pulled out an old photograph from her pocket, holding it up for everyone to see. This is him in Vietnam. He earned a Purple Heart, saving 3 of his fellow soldiers. And you know what? He kept on saving people even after the war. There's a Wilder Works foreman who's alive today because my grandfather pulled him from a warehouse accident in '91. Phones throughout the audience lifted to capture her words. Local news cameras zoomed in on Maya's determined face. But now, after all these years of dedication, after all the sacrifices he's made, Maya's voice grew thick with emotion. The board wants to throw him away like he's nothing. Like all the veteran employees are nothing. My grandfather's in the hospital right now because of the stress, but you know what he said to me this morning? She paused, looking directly into the nearest camera. He said, "Maya, don't worry about me. Fight for the others who need their jobs. That's who my grandfather is. That's who these veterans are. They never stop serving, never stop thinking about others." The crowd murmured in agreement. Several veterans in attendance nodded solemnly. "I'm studying to become a nurse because of him," Maya continued, pulling out her acceptance letter. "He taught me that taking care of people matters more than money. But I guess Wilder Works board doesn't understand that. They see numbers on a spreadsheet, not human beings who've served their country." A reporter raised her hand. "Maya, what would you say to the board members if they were here?" Maya squared her shoulders, her voice clear and steady. "I'd tell them to look my grandfather in the eye. Tell him to his face that his 27 years of service mean nothing. Tell all these veterans that their dedication doesn't matter. Tell their families that corporate profits are worth more than their dignity." Phones pinged throughout the room as social media notifications started flooding in. The local news feed was already streaming live. "Mr. Graham Wilder saw it," Maya said, her voice softening. "He saw past the numbers. He created the Honor Hire program because he understood that veterans deserve more than empty thanks. They deserve real opportunities. Now he's being punished for doing the right thing." She pulled out one final item, her grandfather's worn work badge. "This badge isn't just a piece of plastic. It's 27 years of showing up before dawn. It's my college fund, built one floor buffer at a time. It's my grandfather's pride in a job well done. And now," Maya's voice finally broke, tears streaming down her face. "Now he's in a hospital bed, worried about everyone else's jobs but his own. Is this how we thank our veterans? Is this what corporate America has become?" The room erupted in applause and shouts of support. Reporters pressed forward, microphones extended. Camera flashes lit up the room. "Share this," someone called from the crowd. "Get it everywhere." Cynthia's phone buzzed continuously as notifications poured in. The local news footage was already being picked up by national outlets. Wilder Works veterans started trending on social media. Ruth rushed to Maya's side as she stepped down from the podium, enveloping the young woman in a tight hug. "You did it, sweetheart. You did it." Maya buried her face in Ruth's shoulder, exhausted but determined. "I just told the truth. And the truth is exactly what people needed to hear," Cynthia said, showing Maya her phone screen. The video was spreading like wildfire across multiple platforms. Comments poured in by the thousands, many from veterans and their families sharing similar stories. Major news networks started calling. Veterans organizations pledged their support. Corporate watchdog groups demanded answers from Wilder Works board. Maya's simple, heartfelt speech had accomplished what spreadsheets and statistics couldn't. It had put a human face on the struggle. Her grandfather's story, told through the eyes of a devoted granddaughter, resonated far beyond the small community center. As the crowd began to disperse, Maya glanced at her phone. A text message from her grandfather's nurse. "He saw you on TV. He's smiling." The grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Shareholders in expensive suits filled the rows of chairs, their murmurs echoing off marble columns. At the front, a long table draped in dark blue cloth seated the Wilder Works board members, with Leonard Pike commanding center position. Graham sat in the front row beside Cynthia, his jaw tight. He could feel the weight of his brother's dog tags in his pocket. He'd brought them for strength. Behind him, Ruth and Maya occupied seats among a group of veterans in pressed uniforms, including several Wilder Works employees. Pike tapped the microphone, and the room fell silent. "Distinguished shareholders," he began, his voice smooth as polished granite. "We face a crisis of leadership. In recent months, Graham Wilder has demonstrated a concerning pattern of emotional decision-making that threatens the very foundation of this company. Screens around the room lit up with charts showing dips in stock prices. Pike gestured to them with practiced grace. Mr. Wilder's ill-conceived honor hire program has already cost us millions in implementation fees. His reckless announcement triggered a significant market correction. But more concerning is his fundamental misunderstanding of our mission. Pike's eyes swept the room. We are not a charity. We are not a social services agency. We are a business, accountable to you, our shareholders. Every dollar diverted to Mr. One. Wilder's pet project is $1 stolen from your returns. Graham watched several investors nod. His fingers curled around the armrest as Pike continued. The numbers don't lie. Pike clicked to the next slide. Our janitorial services cost 47% more than industry-standard outsourcing. Mr. Wilder wants to increase that gap by adding expensive training programs and benefits packages for what is, frankly, unskilled labor. In the audience, Maya's face flushed red. Graham saw her grandfather squeeze her hand. But perhaps most disturbing, Pike's voice dropped to a concerned whisper, is Mr. Wilder's emotional instability. The screens showed carefully edited clips from the town hall, making Graham appear unhinged as he announced the program. Is this the behavior of a man we trust with billions in shareholder value? Pike straightened his tie. The board recommends immediate removal of Graham Wilder as CEO and termination of all associated vanity projects. We have a responsibility to return this company to rational, profit-focused management. Applause scattered through the room. Pike sat down, satisfaction evident in his slight smile. The lead director stood. Mr. Wilder, you have 15 minutes to respond before we move to vote. Graham walked to the podium slowly, his heart pounding. He placed his brother's dog tags on the wooden surface, drawing strength from their presence. Then he looked up, meeting Pike's cold stare. Mr. Pike speaks of numbers. Let's talk about numbers. Graham nodded to Ruth, who triggered new slides. In the 3 months since implementing honor hire at our pilot locations, employee turnover dropped 62%. Customer satisfaction scores rose 28%. Equipment maintenance costs decreased 15% due to veteran expertise. He clicked to the next slide. Our veteran-led cleaning teams aren't unskilled labor. They're bringing military precision and leadership to our operations. They're training others. They're improving processes, and yes, we're paying them fairly, with benefits that reflect their value. Graham's voice strengthened. But there are other numbers that matter. 22, that's how many veterans die by suicide each day in this country. 67%. That's how many veteran families struggle to make ends meet in their first year after service. He pulled out his phone and held it up. And here's another number, 2 million. That's how many views this video received yesterday. The screen switched to Maya's rally speech. Her clear voice filled the ballroom. My grandfather earned the Purple Heart serving this country. He raised me alone after my parents died, working double shifts, never complaining. He taught me that true strength isn't in how much money you make. It's in how you lift others up. Wilderworks has a chance to be different, to show that corporate America can have both profits and purpose. Mr. Wilder saw that. He saw my grandfather's worth when others just saw his age. He saw my dreams when others just saw a janitor's granddaughter. Graham let the video play for another moment before signaling Ruth to pause it. The room was silent. Leonard Pike says we're not a charity. He's right. We're something better. We're a company that recognizes human dignity, creates real value. Graham gestured to the back of the room. I'd like to introduce James Morrison, CEO of Landmark Properties, one of our biggest clients. A distinguished man in a wheelchair rolled forward. 6 months ago, I was ready to switch providers. Today, Wilderworks handles all 23 of our properties because their veteran teams deliver unmatched quality and professionalism. I'm expanding our contract by 30% next quarter. More business leaders stood to offer similar testimonies. Graham watched the shareholders' expressions shift from skepticism to interest. Finally, Graham said quietly, I'd like to address Pike's concern about emotional leadership. He picked up his brother's dog tags. My brother died serving this country. I spent years running from that pain, building walls, measuring everything in dollars and cents. I was wrong. Real leadership takes both head and heart. He straightened his shoulders. The numbers prove honor hire works, but more importantly, it's right. I'm asking you to vote for a Wilder Works that leads with courage, that sees the human value beyond the bottom line. Thank you. The lead director called for votes to be cast. The room hummed with whispered conversations as shareholders marked their ballots. Ushers collected them in clear boxes while Graham returned to his seat, heart pounding. Pike's confident smile had vanished. He watched the vote counters with narrow eyes as they began their tally. The next 10 minutes stretched like hours as shareholders and board members alike waited for the results that would determine Wilder Works' future. The room fell into a tense silence as Janet Chen, the independent auditor, approached the podium with a sealed envelope. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, each step echoing through the grand ballroom. Graham's hands were clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Beside him, Cynthia reached over and gave his arm a gentle squeeze. Pike sat at the center of the board table, his usual smirk replaced by a thin, hard line. The morning sun streaming through the tall windows caught the sheen of sweat on his forehead. The shareholders have voted, Janet announced, her voice clear and professional. She opened the envelope with deliberate care. With 68% in favor, the motion to reinstate Graham Wilder as CEO of Wilder Works has passed. The ballroom erupted. Applause thundered from the back of the room, where employees and veterans had gathered to watch. Maya's joyful cry rang out above the noise. Graham closed his eyes for a moment, letting out a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Furthermore, Janet continued once the noise had settled. The proposed Honor Hire program has been approved for nationwide implementation with 72% of votes in favor. This time, the applause was deafening. Graham turned in his seat to see Ernie standing near the back wall, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and the old veteran gave a small, proud nod. Pike's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly. I hereby tender my resignation as chairman of the board, effective immediately. His voice was clipped, face flushed with anger and humiliation. Without another word, he gathered his papers and strode toward the exit, shoulders rigid. As Pike passed Graham's row, he paused for just a moment. You've made a terrible mistake, he muttered. This sentimentality will be your downfall. Graham rose to his full height, looking Pike directly in the eye. No, Leonard. The mistake was forgetting that a company is more than just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's people, and I intend to take care of ours. Pike's jaw clenched, but he said nothing more as he walked out of the ballroom. The heavy doors closed behind him with a definitive thud. Cynthia was already on her feet, clipboard in hand. I'll start coordinating with HR about the nationwide rollout, she said, her usually stern expression softened by a smile. Ruth is going to be over the moon. Thank you, Cynthia, Graham said, for everything. I couldn't have done this without you. Oh, please, she replied with a small laugh. You just needed someone to remind you of who you really are. She patted his shoulder and headed off to make calls. The crowd had begun to disperse, but excitement still hummed in the air. Small groups gathered, chatting animatedly about the future of the program. Veterans who had come to support the cause were exchanging contact information with HR representatives, already eager to get involved. Graham made his way through the crowd, accepting handshakes and congratulations with genuine warmth. He caught snippets of conversation about training programs, scholarship opportunities, and community outreach initiatives. The vision he'd sketched out in those late-night planning sessions was already taking shape in people's minds. Finally, he reached the back of the ballroom where Ernie waited. Maya stood beside her grandfather, one arm wrapped protectively around his shoulders. Her eyes were bright with happy tears. Mr. Wilder, she began. But Graham held up a hand. Please, it's Graham, he said softly. We're family now. Maya's smile widened, and she stepped forward to give him a quick, fierce hug before stepping back. I need to call my nursing school advisor, she said. They'll want to know about the scholarship program. She squeezed her grandfather's hand once more and slipped away, leaving the two men alone. Graham gestured toward a quiet corner behind one of the marble columns. Would you mind stepping backstage with me for a moment, Ernie? The old veteran nodded, following Graham to a more private space away from the celebrating crowd. The sounds of conversation and laughter became muted, creating a pocket of calm in the midst of all the excitement. I never properly thanked you, Graham said, his voice rough with emotion. You've taught me more in these past few weeks than I learned in 30 years of business. Ernie shook his head. I didn't do anything special, son. Just tried to live right and take care of my own. That's exactly what made it special. Graham smiled. You showed me what real strength looks like, not in boardroom battles or profit margins, but in quiet dignity and unwavering faith. The Lord works in mysterious ways, Ernie said softly. Sometimes he uses a stubborn old janitor to teach a lesson about humanity. Graham felt tears pricking at his eyes. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around the older man in a tight embrace. We did it, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Ernie's strong arms came up to return the hug, and for a moment, Graham felt the same sense of safety and belonging he'd experienced in his brother's embraces so many years ago. They stood there in comfortable silence. Two men from different worlds brought together by circumstance and transformed by understanding. Behind them, the sounds of celebration continued, filled with promise and possibility. But in this quiet moment, Graham knew the real victory wasn't in the votes or the program approval. It was in the simple truth that sometimes the greatest changes start with a single act of humility and the courage to see the dignity in every human being. As they pulled apart, Ernie's eyes were bright with pride and affection. The morning sun streaming through the nearby window caught the silver in his hair, creating a gentle halo effect that seemed fitting for a man who had been Graham's unlikely guardian angel. The autumn morning sparkled with promise as hundreds of Wilderworks employees gathered outside the newly constructed building. Its modern glass facade caught the sunlight, making the brass lettering shine. The Holloway Training Center for Veterans. Beneath the name, smaller text read, Where Service Continues. Ernest Holloway stood quietly beside Graham Wilder, both men wearing dark suits. The elderly janitor's purple heart gleamed on his lapel, matched by the small replica pin Graham now wore on his own jacket. Behind them, Maya beamed in a navy dress, holding her acceptance letter to nursing school. I still say this is too much, Ernie whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Graham shook his head. It's not enough, my friend. Not nearly enough. The crowd stretched across the plaza. Janitors, office workers, executives, and veterans from across the city. Many wore their service pins. Ruth from HR dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, while Cynthia, usually stoic, couldn't hide her proud smile. Ladies and gentlemen, the MC announced through the speakers, please welcome Mr. Ernest Holloway and CEO Graham Wilder for the official ribbon cutting of our new veteran training facility. The applause was deafening. Someone started chanting, Ernie, Ernie, until the whole crowd joined in. The elderly veteran ducked his head, humble as always, but Graham caught the shimmer in his eyes. Together, they stepped forward to the large red ribbon. An oversized pair of ceremonial scissors waited on a velvet cushion. Graham picked them up and offered them to Ernie. This is your moment, Graham said quietly. You earned it. Ernie shook his head and placed his weathered hands next to Graham's on the scissors. Together, son. That's how we got here. The crowd fell silent as the two men positioned the scissors. With a clean snip, the ribbon fell away. Cheers erupted again, and colorful balloons were released into the clear blue sky. Graham stepped to the microphone. 2 months ago, I was a different man, the kind who looked right through people like Ernest Holloway, the kind who valued profit over dignity. But sometimes, God sends us angels in disguise to teach us better ways. He gestured to Ernie. This man taught me about service, not just in war, but in peace. About dignity in every job, no matter how humble. About quiet strength and unshakable faith. Graham's voice grew thick. He showed me what my own brother died fighting to protect. Not just freedom, but the chance to build a better world together. Ernie stood straight and tall, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks. Maya held his arm, her own eyes glistening. The Holloway Training Center will provide career training for veterans transitioning to civilian life, Graham continued. But more than that, it will be a place where their wisdom and experience can shape our company's future. Every trainee will spend time with our senior advisor for veteran affairs, Mr. Ernest Holloway himself. More applause broke out. Ernie raised a hand in humble acknowledgement. And speaking of the Holloway legacy, Graham smiled. We have one more announcement. Maya, would you join me up here? Maya's eyes widened as she walked to the podium. Her grandfather watched with pure love and pride. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to announce the first recipient of the Wilderworks Full Nursing Scholarship. Graham pulled out an envelope. Miss Maya Holloway, who has already been accepted to the nursing program at State University, will have her entire education funded, including books, housing, and a living stipend. Maya's hands flew to her mouth as she began to cry. The crowd erupted again, this time chanting, "May! May! May! Ay!" She hugged Graham fiercely, then ran to embrace her grandfather. Ernie held her close, his tears falling into her hair as the chanting continued to echo across the plaza. The morning sun caught the glass of the new building, sending ribbons of light across the gathering. They danced over the faces of janitors and executives, veterans and civilians, all united in celebration of a young woman's dream and the grandfather whose quiet dignity had changed them all. The chanting grew louder. May. A. May. A. May. A. Maya buried her face in her grandfather's chest, overwhelmed by joy. Ernie kissed the top of her head, whispering words only she could hear as the crowd continued to celebrate around them. The private dining room at Maria's Italian restaurant buzzed with warm conversation and laughter. White tablecloths gleamed under soft lighting, and the smell of garlic bread and marinara sauce filled the air. Around the long table sat the key players who had helped transform Wilderworks. Ruth from HR, Cynthia the COO, Maya in her new nursing scrubs, and a dozen others who had fought alongside them. Graham Wilder sat at the head of the table, his tie loosened, looking more relaxed than anyone had seen him in years. The lines of worry that had creased his face during the board battle had softened. Beside him, Ernest Holloway wore his best suit, the one he'd worn to Maya's high school graduation. His real Purple Heart caught the light as he reached for his water glass. To new beginnings, Cynthia raised her glass in a toast. And to the two men who showed us what real leadership looks like. The group clinked glasses. Maya beamed at her grandfather, then at Graham. Lolo, she said, using the Filipino term of endearment for grandfather. Remember when you used to tell me that good things come to those who stay faithful? Ernie's eyes crinkled. I remember telling you that every morning before school when you wanted to quit. And now look, Ruth chimed in. The training center's first class starts next week. 20 veterans getting a fresh start. Graham shook his head, still amazed at how far they'd come. I never thought I'd say this, but getting caught being a jerk that morning was the best thing that ever happened to me. Quiet laughter rippled around the table. The waiters brought out plates of tiramisu, but Ernie held up his hand, asking for everyone's attention. From his jacket pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. The room hushed. Ernie turned to Graham, his voice soft but clear. Son, I've been thinking about this for a while. When I got my Purple Heart, it was for wounds received in service. But there are other kinds of wounds, and other kinds of healing. Graham's throat tightened as Ernie opened the box. Inside lay a small replica of his Purple Heart pin. This isn't for battle scars, Ernie continued. Not for wounds, but for healing. You helped heal this company's soul. You helped heal old soldiers' pride. And maybe, he glanced at the photo of Graham's brother that now sat on the CEO's desk. Maybe you helped heal yourself too. With trembling fingers, Ernie pinned the replica on Graham's lapel. The younger man bowed his head, unable to speak for a moment. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. The restaurant's piano player, sensing the moment, began to play softly. The old hymn, Amazing Grace. Ruth started humming, then singing quietly. One by one, others joined in, their voices blending in gentle harmony. Maya reached for her grandfather's hand. Cynthia wiped her eyes with her napkin. The waiters paused in their work, touched by the scene. Graham looked around the table at these people who had become more than employees. They were family now. He thought of his brother, who had died believing in service and sacrifice. He thought of Ernie, who had taught him that true strength lay in humility and compassion. He thought of all the veterans who would soon walk through the doors of the Holloway Training Center, carrying their own wounds but finding new purpose. The singing swelled softly, and Graham felt something settle in his chest, a peace he hadn't known in years. Gone was the driven, cynical CEO who had stormed through the lobby that early morning. In his place sat a man who had learned that real success wasn't measured in profit margins but in lives touched and hearts healed. As the last notes of the hymn faded, Graham looked down at his new pin, not a symbol of wounds received, but of wounds healed. His brother would have been proud. His company was redeemed. And his heart, so long closed off, had finally found its way home. All around the table, hands remained clasped as the hymn's final echo drifted away. In that moment of shared grace, Graham Wilder, once the coldest man in the corporate world, felt the full warmth of redemption. His brother was honored, his company transformed, and his heart restored to what it was always meant to be. The room fell into peaceful silence, broken only by the soft clink of glasses and the distant sounds of the kitchen. In that quiet moment, they all felt it, the profound rightness of where their journey had led them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges at Wilder Works, but tonight was for celebrating healing in all its forms. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Graham Wilder, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.